I wanted to play this clip of the chairman of Signature Bank.
I'm Scott Shea, chairman of Signature Bank, and it is a pleasure for me to welcome you to this multimedia, multicasted, multi-spatial meeting of the Pride Council.
Now, if you're watching, you saw in the background a big screen that said pronounce the pronouns. So making sure you get the right pronouns. This is the wokeness that has taken over corporate America. And of course, the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank over this past weekend has really kind of highlighted this. It's brought new scrutiny to other regional banks with similar financial concerns. So there's financial aspects to this, but there's also the issue of distraction. Are they being distracted by pursuing all of these, woke agenda items of the left, the environmental, social, and governmental policies that they want them to pursue, the proper pronouns? I mean, what does it have to do with the balance sheet? All right, what does it have to do with ensuring that your investors and shareholders are protected? Well, the answer is nothing. But I think this is exposing it, and this is what we need to do. Now, Democrats in Congress, most notably Senator Elizabeth Warren, are saying that the failures are a direct result of the Trump-era bill that was passed in 2018, a claim that Republicans disagree with.
If the management of Silicon Valley Bank had known the difference between a banking textbook and an LL Bean catalog, Silicon Valley Bank would have never bought securities that are so sensitive to interest rate without hedging that risk.
That was my hometown Senator John Kennedy speaking from the Senate floor earlier today. So is there more behind this? And are these failures being driven by a distraction of the left's priorities? Joining me now to discuss this is Will Hild. He's the Executive Director of Consumer Research, which is all about putting consumers first and fighting against the environmental, social, and governance standards of the left. Will, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So if my proper pronoun would be he, but just want to make sure you knew that. So what's your take on what's been happening with these banks?
Well, I think, as you said, there's no question that there's a connection between wokeness, the ESG investing movement, and what we've seen going on at Silicon Valley Bank and its Signature. Both of these banks were heavily involved in corporate wokeness and that culture. In fact, Silicon Valley Bank, it was reported by the Daily Mail over the weekend, their chief risk officer had not performed a stress test on their portfolio for over 9 months because she was busy planning Pride, LGBTQ, and lesbian recognition events, basically. And in addition, they had engaged in all kinds of other woke investing and woke lending that contributed to their downfall. And so time and time again, we see companies, when they focus on ESG, when they focus on wokeness, they take their eye off of the ball of focusing on consumers. In this case, it was focusing on making sure that they didn't lose their customers' money. But we've seen this in other contexts as well, where the quality of products and services goes down because corporations are too focused on other things.
Is this not a liability for them from a standpoint of a legal liability? I mean, can't shareholders, when you start looking at all this stuff that is unrelated to their fiduciary duty, does that not present a legal liability?
Yes, well, I think it does. I think you're going to increasingly see shareholder lawsuits that are aimed at that. There's also a question of a legal doctrine called the business judgment, which is generally a good idea. It basically says that in shareholder lawsuits around misuse of corporate assets, judges shouldn't impart their own business judgment and say, well, this was a good business decision or this was a bad business decision, and therefore it was a misuse of corporate assets, because they obviously judges aren't business people. But in something as egregious as this, I think you're going to start to see the judiciary say there are limits to the business judgment rule. You can't just do anything you want with corporate assets, with the brand, with the goodwill of a company. and say that it's in line with the fiduciary duty that you have to shareholders. So I do think you're going to start to see some legal action on this front.
So Will, it's kind of like when everything's running smooth, nobody really pays a whole lot of attention to this. But when people's investments, their retirements, all of the things that really matter are in jeopardy, do you think this is one of those pivotal moments where people are going to start to pay attention to this idiocy that's taking place in corporate America?
Certainly. Well, there's of course the famous Warren Buffett quote. Well, that it's not until the tide goes out that you see who's been swimming naked. Now we've been ringing the alarm now for numerous years, and I know you have as well. So it's not fair to say that no one had any inclination that this was going to be happening. But I think now that we're in a tighter monetary regime with higher interest rates and higher inflation, a lot of the poor decisions of these companies that have gone woke are coming home to roost. I think Silicon Valley Bank and Signature are really they're cautionary tales. They're probably just the beginning of what we're going to find out, the misuse of assets and time and attention that's been going on in corporate America. And there are going to be, unfortunately, real world consequences with this. There already have been, but you're going to see corporations that should have been doing fine if they had their eye on the ball go bankrupt, just like Silicon Valley.
Well, this Silicon Bank report reporting that they gave $73 million to Black Lives Matter related groups. I mean, $73 million?
Yeah, and that's an organization that we know, at least at one point, had on their official platform the abolishment of the nuclear family. So there's all kinds of questions. What businesses any company have in giving to an organization that has that as a platform position? And I'm sure that the customers of Silicon Valley Bank wish that they could get some of that $74 million back now when it turns out that it's coming out of their deposits.
So do you foresee corporations kind of straightening up a little bit and maybe trying to cover up some paper trails as this is, as you said, this has exposed not just Signature Bank and Silicon Valley, but I mean others. I mean, I'm sure there are others out there that if another shoe is to drop, they're going to be exposed as well.
Yeah, I do think you're going to start to see a toning down of the woke corporate culture. My concern, though, is much of the infrastructure that led to this may still be in place after it's over. And the same people that have been pushing DEI and CRT and ESG, I know all those horrible acronyms that will rightly oppose, those departments are still going to be in place. Those people are going to still be in place. And I think it's incumbent upon us, both as a nonprofit organization, but I've been your efforts, I know you've railed on this for a number of years, to make sure that we systematically dismantle what led to this in the first place. And you talk about there being liability for the people who misuse corporate assets. I think that's a great question. And also legislative changes to make it clear that the fiduciary duty has to be followed. And that's really what's been amiss here is people have been taking assets that don't belong to them. We have to make sure that people understand that there's a price to be paid when they break the law.
But Will, we know that we're talking now about the banking industry, but this isn't isolated to the banking industry. We've seen failures elsewhere where the focus has been on wokeness, to use a broad term. I mean, test scores are down in our schools. Kids don't know the ABCs, but they know the LGBT agenda. Our military, we're having difficulty, every branch of the service in its recruitment goals because they're spending more time on diversity training than they are in actually their core mission. I mean, what we're seeing, unfortunately, sometimes it's too late. I mean, when we need our military, we're going to need them. And it's a little too late to find out at that point that they have misplaced their focus of training. So again, could this be a moment of course correction, not just in the banking industry, but for what we've tolerated in America when it comes to this leftist agenda?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we do see our institutions course correct. I don't want to leave anyone with a sense of doom or that there's no hope that we can come out of this. Obviously, I'm a fellow believer, Tony, and I believe that with Christ all things are possible. So I certainly don't think that that our problems are so bad that we can't turn them around. But I do think we have to let's say, give up on the idea that there's some magical thing called the pendulum. Like I often hear people say, well, the pendulum will swing back the other way. Well, no, if people of good faith and character don't push the pendulum back that direction, the people who are pushing this kind of stuff are not going to stop on their own. Right. So I do agree, absolutely, with the failure of Silicon Valley, with the failure of Signature, with the failure of, we were on here talking about State Farm, and the huge amount of pushback that you and your viewers were able to apply to that company with our research was instrumental in getting them to course correct. So I don't want to give anybody a sense of doom, but I do want to say it is incumbent upon us, right, to push that. We can't sit back and say, well, it'll course correct itself. We have to take these opportunities to point to these cautionary tales and say, this is why you don't do this.
My point, exactly. This is a moment to act. This is not. I think it's a. Quite frankly, I think they're going to be on their heels, pushed back on their heels by the exposure that they've gotten. Whether or not it's a wake-up call for them personally, because I'm not sure that they really can get it. I mean, I think they think they're doing the right thing. But I think the average American who understands the military is to defend us, the schools are to teach our children how to succeed in the workplace, our airlines and the FFA, the FAA is there to make sure planes go up in the air and they come back down safely. But when they can't do that because they're distracted, I think that gets people's attention. So what are some of the things we can be doing right now?
Absolutely. Well, there's a whole range of things. First of all, people need to understand what they're up against. They can learn more about the ESG investing, or so-called investing, but I put that in scare quotes because it's a scam. They can learn more at consumersresearch.org. That's our website. And they can also, we recommend everyone call their elected representatives, especially at the state level. There are about 20 to 25 states this legislative session. They're going to be considering legislation that would curtail ESG investing and wokeism in our corporate culture. Things like strengthening the fiduciary duty and making it so that your state won't use woke companies to manage your state's pension funds. And so calling anyone, I mean, honestly, calling your state elected, state senator, state representative, your AG's office, your governor's office, your treasurer's office, all of these people play a role in pushing back against woke corporate culture and against the ESG. And they need to hear from you, because this is not, I'll admit, this is not the sexiest issue. It's got this weird acronym. It's all about this Wall Street stuff. And they don't know whether the electorate cares about it or not. So you need to pick up the phone and call them and let them know that you do care about it. You don't want your state's assets used against your values. And so they know that you have their back in fighting back against it.
In further evidence, I think that people are responding. They're speaking just as you just described, because we have seen a number of states take on BlackRock. And earlier today, the CEO of BlackRock released his annual chairman's letter, and you notably stated that there is not a single mention of ESG in that letter. Do you think that other companies may be taking note of this pushback that's coming, and that they're kind of changing their tune, not necessarily changing their behavior?
I think Larry Fink and BlackRock played a pivotal role in pushing a lot of these companies to go even farther than they would have otherwise wanted to. And notable turnaround that we've been able to effect on BlackRock. I mean, Larry had been sending out this letter to CEOs for years. And I think he began that letter with an explanation that moving forward, his letter was going to basically be to everybody, to all his stakeholders, which included his shareholders, his clients, his employees. There's obviously a euphemism for I'm not going to act like I'm in charge of all of corporate America anymore. And I think that's a positive development, clearly retreating from his position. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see a bit of a sea change in corporate America. We've hopefully gotten some of the pressure off with some of the big asset managers. Now, don't get me wrong. Larry has not had a change of heart. He still wants to basically, call the shots in corporate America. And what he's used to do publicly, he's now going to do quietly.
Right.
We have to keep the pressure on.
Right. So we can't take our eye off. They may be taking their eye off of their duty. We cannot take our eye off our duty to protect our rights, our freedoms, and our future.
Exactly.
Will, always great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your support, and love to come on. Always happy to.